Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Why don't we dive into another exciting episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll read Chapter 5 of Red by the Red Rocker, Sammy Hagar. Chapter 5 is actually called The Red Rocker. To get myself into the Red Rocker mood, I have a red shirt, red shoes, a red drink, red flowers, a red bandana, red keychain, and last but not least, some red wax cubes. Here we go. As soon as I got home from being fired, I walked into my sister's house and went straight to the phone. Betsy had come over to Europe again, and Bobby had been taking care of Aaron. I went straight from the airport to her house. I picked up the phone and called D. Anthony and told him Ronnie fired me. "Hold on," he said. "Don't be dropping no bomb on me. I've got to look into this. You guys owe me a lot of money." I never heard from D again. Jerry Berg, who was D. Anthony's tour manager, always liked me. When I told him I needed a manager, he quit his job to manage me. He was a first-class guy, smart, always well-dressed. He handled the money, and I thought he had his business down. He seemed like a good business guy, but he really didn't know what he was doing managing a band. D. Anthony had been doing everything and keeping Jerry in the dark. I was on my last nickel. I went over and stood in line and started collecting unemployment again. I was considering going back on welfare too because I had a baby. My house rent in Mill Valley was more than $200 a month, which in those days was a lot of money, way more than I was able to make in a month. I was down and out, brother. People in San Francisco thought I was a big star. They figured these guys headlined Winterland. I would have thought we'd made it too, but I didn't have any money. I took an old mattress that I picked up off the side of the road and put it up against the wall in my basement for soundproofing. I started writing, went down there with a guitar and an amp and a little cassette recorder, and I just recorded. I wrote and wrote and wrote. Bill Church was immediately on board because he hated Ronnie for firing him from Montrose. When Denny couldn't come over anymore, I started getting his little brother, Billy Carmassi. I had this slide player, Glenn Campbell, from a band called Juicy Lucy. He had played around Riverside before moving to England and was fresh off the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour with Joe Cocker and Leon Russell. All I knew how to do in those days was what I had done with Montrose. That was the start of my solo years. I just knew how to be Montrose without Ronnie. I was playing guitar and singing. I was really driven to write my own songs and go out and tour until I made it. I didn't think about hits. The first guy I called was Ted Templeman. The Warner Brothers staff producer who had made the first two Montrose albums was the only person I knew in the record business. He declined to sign me as a solo artist, but Ted did give me a couple of $1,000s to demo out some songs. I went into Wally Hyder's studio and cut Silver Lights, a couple of other songs that I had written for Montrose, and a couple of the new songs. Jerry and I went down to KSAN, the San Francisco FM rock radio station, and thank God for radio stations like that in those days. They played my 5-song demo, put it right on the air. I didn't even have the songs copyrighted, but it didn't matter anyway. John Carter was out there somewhere and heard it. Carter, known universally by his last name only, was a San Francisco-based A&R man for Capitol Records who had written Incense and Peppermints and that Acapulco Gold, and a couple of other goofy songs. But I don't think he had produced anything at that point. He called and said he wanted to sign me to Capitol Records. About the same time, he signed Bob Seger. That's when Carter went through the roof at Capitol. He went on to do the Tina Turner Comeback, Private Dancer, and then signed the Motels. Carter had some really interesting ideas. The fact that he signed me and that I've had such a long career shows his insight because I never actually had any success on Capitol. We cut the first album at the record plant in Sausalito. One day I saw Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones recording stuff for his Monkey Grip solo album. I'm starstruck. I went up and introduced myself. "I'm from Montrose," I told him. "We did one of your songs, Connection." "Brilliant, mate," he said, and walked off. The plant was a crazy scene. I was coming in at 10 o'clock at night and working until 6 or 7 in the morning, the cheapest times I could get. There were so many drugs around there, it was unbelievable. One night I walked in and the guy at the front desk was doing nitrous oxide. The engineer that Carter hired was also doing nitrous while he mixed the album. He took one song called All American, and while I was gone had everybody overdub. He doubled everything. He doubled the bass, doubled the drums. He put two 24 tracks together. He played it for me the next day. It was out of sync and wobbled. As if the nitrous weren't enough, these guys had been on a 2-day coke/weed run. I threw it out. One day I was heading out of the studio when I heard someone buzzing at the door. The receptionist on nitrous was nowhere to be found, so I buzzed the guy at the door in. It was Van Morrison. "Drug addicts," he muttered as he walked past the reception area. I chased after him. "Van, I'm Sammy Hagar," I said. "I'm doing a record with John Carter." He knew Carter? "Do you have any songs?" "Like what?" he said. "Like Into the Mystic," I said. It was my favorite Van song. "Follow me," he said. He picked an acoustic guitar and we went into a little tiny room. He played me Flamingos Fly. Giving it up, not like going through the motions. Eyes closed, singing the out of it. I'm goosebumped. This guy's my hero, my favorite songwriter at the time, him and John Lennon. They were the guys I wanted to write like. He told me he would come back the next day and make a recording of the song for me. I was jacked out of my brain. When I told Carter, he went nuts. When Van Morrison came back the next day, he was in a different mood. He went in without a click track, sat down at a microphone, played acoustic guitar, and sang the song for a demo. This time, he couldn't have cared less. He knocked it off and split. But Carter gets a bright idea. We have Jimmy Hodner from Steely Dan overdub drums, Bill Church overdub the bass, he had played with Van before, and me singing, and put together this track like it's a duet with me and Van Morrison. We were getting ready to come out with that record, and Van got wind of it. His attorneys took him off that record so fast. We had to go back in at the last minute and start from scratch on that song. About 2 years later, Van's still my hero, but I never talked to him again. I went to the Mill Valley movie theater. Betsy and I buy our tickets and go stand in line. Guess who's in front of me? Van Morrison and his girlfriend. I didn't want to say anything to him because he was shining on me. He had his back to me so hard. Within 30 seconds, he grabbed this woman. "Let's get out of here," he said, and they were gone. The plant always had people like that coming and going. Sly Stone had a room at the plant they called the Pit. We worked in the room for a while. That's where the engineer did that coke and nitrous mix of All American, and we were told we had to move to another room because Sly was coming. One night it was raining like a mother, and I needed to get 2 guitars out of my car. Sly Stone pulled up in a Rolls Royce while I'm getting my gear out of the car. He was wearing a big fur coat, floppy hat, and had an entourage around him. One of his guys goes up, hits the buzzer. As soon as the door opens, they hold it open. Sly goes in last. I run for the door. It's pouring rain, and I'm carrying 2 guitars. "Hey, hold the door," I said. Sly looked right at me and let the door slam shut. I was pissed. I was in a bad mood about something anyway. I went off. I started kicking the door, yelling and screaming, hitting the buzzer. Mr. Nitrous head at the front desk opened the door, and I steamed past him. Sly was standing with his guys in the lobby. "You mother," I said. "You could have held that door open. It's raining outside." "People hold doors open for me, mother," Sly said. His big bodyguard swung around and pushed me against the wall, and Sly walked off. I was all by myself. What a... There was a girl who also worked behind the reception desk sometimes who was always doing coke. "You want some?" she would say. She was there one night when I came staggering out of the studio after singing 7 hours straight. My head was killing me. "I've got a singing headache," I told her. She came around from behind the desk, undid my pants, started me right there in the lobby, about 2 in the morning. She wanted to take me in the jacuzzi, but I didn't go for that. I wasn't that promiscuous then, but when a chick unzips your pants and starts going down on you, it's really hard to say no. That's the kind of place this was. When I got my record deal from Capitol, they gave me $50,000. Before then, I had been broke, flat down to nothing and getting unemployment. The next week, I got the check for $50,000. When I told the unemployment people about it, they said, "What about the next week? Are you getting paid?" They gave me my checks. and I've got a Porsche parked out front. Because I was using a Capitol Records in-house producer, all the recording costs went on their budget, and I got to keep the whole 50 grand. I was living good. This was the most money I had ever had. Of course, I had to pay band members. I had to pay roadies if I wanted to use roadies. I had to rent trucks. But the studio time and the musician's studio pay was all covered by Capitol. They were running a tab, though I didn't realize that. Anyway, my first album, 9 on a 10 scale, got done and came out in May 1976. I went out on tour almost immediately with Joe Cocker, Ted Nugent, lots of others. I opened for everybody. They pulled the plug on that record at 27,000 copies. It went out of print, not because it was dying. It didn't do that great, but there was some kind of behind-the-scenes politics with D. Anthony, who still thought I owed him money from Montrose and managed to wield considerable power in the industry. That killed it at the label. As a result of this, I parted ways with Jerry Berg and signed for management with Ed Loeffler, the man who would handle my career for the rest of my life. I had first met Loeffler when I was auditioning for Capitol in Hollywood at the Starwood with my new band, which I was calling Sammy Wild and the Dust Cloud. A dust cloud is the beginning of a star. I was still on the Bowie kick, and I was going to be from another planet. I was going to be from Mars. I was appearing on a showcase gig that Jerry had helped put together with Backstreet Crawler, a new band led by Paul Kossoff of British rockers Free, whose All Right Now was a favorite of mine. Loeffler ended up at the showcase because he managed the red-hot British teen pop band The Sweet, and he had come looking for a good opening act for his band when The Sweet hit the Santa Monica Civic the following week. He caught my show. There is no way I'm going to let that blonde-haired, energetic mother open for my guys, he said. He hired Blackstreet Crawler instead, only Kossoff died the next day of a drug-induced heart attack on a plane to New York, and I got the gig anyway. At the shows, I had done everything I could. I had run out into the audience. I pulled every trick I knew. I really worked that show hard, and we drew a huge encore, a band without even a record deal. Backstage, I overheard Loeffler reaming out the vocalist for The Sweet. He was bombed, probably on drugs, and Loeffler laid into him. He was worried that the band, which was huge in England and had Fox on the Run on the charts in this country, was too poppy for America. When we talked later, I told him I already had a manager, but I wanted to go with Loeffler. I still owed Jerry Berg the $10,000 he had paid for the showcase date in Hollywood. He maxed out his credit card to pay for it. Loeffler covered the $10,000 and took over my management from then on. Instead of around, we went straight to England, to Abbey Road, and recorded my next album, Red. When we were getting ready to head over, Carter found a guitar player called Scotty Quick who had a bad cocaine habit, although I had no idea. I didn't know anything about cocaine in those days, other than that I had done it a couple of times to little effect. At this time of my life, I was not into drugs at all. I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs, I didn't even drink wine. Nothing. Scotty Quick was a good guitar player, but he couldn't remember the songs. We'd rehearse them one day, everything was great. The next day, it was like a brand new song. We were getting ready to go to England to record, and he kept up. One night he came to me in my dream, and I told him off, but he was vague, hard to reach, and I couldn't communicate. Next day I found out that he had OD'd shooting coke in a Union 76 gas station bathroom. Real quickly we lined up a new guitarist. My drummer, Scott Matthews, recommended some guy he knew, named John Lewark. I took Lewark, Matthews, bassist Bill Church, and Alan Fitzgerald from Montrose on keyboards, and went for 6 weeks to make a record in England. We were all on a shoestring. It wasn't like I was some big star. I had the record deal, but there were all these guys that looked at me like, I'm better than him. How come he has a record deal? I was working my ass off. I got a record deal because I went to bed at night writing songs. I woke up in the morning writing songs. I spent every second of my waking hours trying to write songs. I really wanted to be a songwriter. Matthews and Lewark looked down at me. I can play guitar better than him, or I can write songs better than that. There were guys around me every now and then that would come into my world trying to make a little money, have a job, but at the same time didn't respect me. Those guys never played with me again. Carter had just signed Bob Seger. He sent me a demo of some song Seger wrote but didn't like called Night Moves. I listened to it, worked on it for a day or so, but didn't feel it. I wanted to rock. Carter thought Seger's song was a hit, but I gave it back to Carter and he made Seger do it. Carter was always trying to get me to do hits, and every time anything seemed like a hit to me, I hated it. He wanted me to do Catch the Wind, and I loved Donovan, so I did that. But I always wanted to be heavy metal. I wanted to rock hard. Carter was trying to give me a pop hit. Before I went to England, I sold my Porsche for $5,000. I bought it for $5,000 and sold it for $5,000. I had heard that you could buy a Ferrari in England for about half of what they would cost over here. In those days, you could go to Europe and buy European cars, Aston Martin, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Maserati, Jaguar, pay to ship them back and still double your money. I had never even really seen a Ferrari up close. Jay Giles took Ronnie and me for a ride around Boston one time in his, a 250 Lusso. That blew my mind. The way it sounded, the way it smelled, the whole thing about it. I had an infatuation. I was always a car guy. With my $5,000, I bought a Ferrari 330 GT 2+2 that belonged to land speed record holder Donald Campbell, my first Ferrari. Right-hand drive, 4-seater, 4 headlights, Bluebird blue. I bought it the first week we got there, and that pissed off Scotty and those guys too. It had 4 seats in it. Every day we drove to the studio in my right-hand drive Ferrari. I was driving it all over England on days off. Betsy and Aaron had come with me to England, and I took them to Stonehenge one day. I drove it to Scotland another. Betsy and I stayed out by Wembley in a kind of apartment, so I was always driving to and from the studio. For 6 weeks we went everywhere in this Ferrari. Then right before I left, I shipped it home. It broke down a couple of times. One time the radiator hose vibrated loose, hit the fan belt, and drilled a hole in that son of a... In the middle of London. I was underneath the thing in the thick of traffic, Betsy and Aaron sitting on the side of the road. The car got so hot it vapor locked. I fixed it with a makeshift hose and a borrowed screwdriver. Capitol paid for everything, but I was digging a hole with them. They paid for making the record. Then they would put me out on tour opening for anybody and everybody. And they had to pay for that too, since I was only making $500 to $1,000 a night as an opening act. And it took about $1,200 a day to be on the road. So Capitol had to pay the difference, which was why, even though I was doing everything cheaply, I still wasn't making any money. As we worked on the second album, I wrote the song Red. Carter tightened up some of the lyrics. He was good with lyrics, so I would listen to him. He was more lyrical than me. Crimson Scenticity is one of Carter's lines. I thought that was clever, kind of deep. I started wearing red, painted my guitars red. I just started going red, red, red. I realized at some point that I really loved the color red. I was still into numerology from that book that I found in that truck behind my house. Between that and the dream I'd had with my father right before I heard about his death, I started seeking out the mystical. Somewhere in came to me that the color red was my color. That was the magical color. Red was everywhere. Red is fuzzy if you look at it. You light red with a red light, it doesn't have hard edges like most colors. It turns into fuzz. It isn't like a defined circle. It gets deep. It looks soft, yet it's aggressive as hell. It's blood and it's energy. It means so many different things. Red is my color. It means everything for me. I dream in red. I took it to numerology. R is a 9, E is a 5, D is a 4, red's a 9. I became the red/9 guy. That was it. They both mean the same thing. They have a power. Red has a rhythm. I put red as my color. 9 is my goal. I want to raise my consciousness to the 9. I changed the name of my publishing company from Big Bang to the 9 Music, wrote the song Red, and started dressing in red. I thought this was going to represent what was going on inside of me. If I put on a pair of red pants, red shoes, red shirt, red guitar, that's Sammy Hagar. I just felt it. I believed it. No one told me to do it. It was what I wanted to do. Years later, David Geffen told me he thought I should lose that red thing. I got along really well with Geffen. He was a strange creature, that's for sure, but he was also as smart as they come. But by the time I got to those guys, they didn't quite understand where I was coming from. I was deep into it by then. Before the January 1977 release of the Red album, official title Sammy Hagar, I got offered the Kiss tour, very big deal, at the last minute. I was added to the bill that February at Madison Square Garden in New York, so late I wasn't even advertised on the show. People started booing before I walked out. I had never played New York except with Montrose. They didn't even know me. I looked out and the whole place was dressed like Kiss. They've all got their makeup on. They were booing and flipping me off. "Hey, what the do you people think you're doing booing me?" I said. "You haven't even heard the music yet. You don't even know what the you're talking about." All dressed in red, I played the first song, Red, entirely unknown to the crowd. I played Bad Motor Scooter, pulled some Montrose out of my ass. I could hear the crowd between songs. You. Then I went in to Catch the Wind, the Donovan song that was the single off Red, and in the middle of it, they drowned me out with booze and started throwing on stage. I stopped. "I'm so happy that they flew in this special audience for me from Los Angeles," I said, and the place went nuts. They charged out of their seats. They wanted to kill me. "You," I said, and dropped my pants, pulled out my and smashed my 61 Stratocaster to pieces on stage. What an idiot. Demolished this vintage guitar and walked off stage. Standing in the wings of all people was Bill Graham, holding his face going, "Oh my God, Sammy." He followed me into the dressing room. "What is wrong with you? Don't ever do that. You could have won over those people." Bill had been riding in a limo on his way to the airport when he'd heard on the radio that Sammy Hagar was opening that night for Kiss at Madison Square Garden. I often wondered if Graham was the Bill that the psychic Mrs. Kellerman asked me about. Graham, the promoter behind all those historic 60s concerts at the Fillmore Auditorium, and the boss of the San Francisco music scene, had taken a personal interest in my case. He was working me up the bills at Winterland, his home base of operations through the 70s, and was one of the first concert producers to act like I might have a shot. When Graham heard on the radio about my show with Kiss, he turned around and came straight to the concert, just in time to walk in and see me pulling down my pants. As I was standing there with Bill, Paul Stanley from Kiss came in. "What happened?" he said. "That was terrible. I can't believe it." I told everyone to shove the Kiss tour up their ass, and never did another date with the band. It was the worst experience I ever had on stage, and it ruined me in New York. They didn't even know who I was. They hated me before they heard me. I was just beginning to figure out who I was. Shortly after the Red album was released, I did a $1 admission concert called The Rising Star in Seattle, a radio station promotion run by some disc jockeys in the Northwest. It worked well for me. I sold out, and the Northwest became one of my first big arenas. The reviewer covering the Rising Star concert in the paper called me the Red Rocker Sammy Hagar. Some kid came up to me with the newspaper, and he asked me to sign it. "Will you sign it the Red Rocker?" he said. I was happy just to sign an autograph. A few days later, I was walking down the street in Texas, and somebody yelled out, "Hey, it's the Red Rocker!" And it hit me. Hey, that's me. Well, that's the end of Chapter 5. Hope you enjoyed this Red-themed chapter. It was nice to finally hear about some of Sammy's solo stuff. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.